Hello, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on SI and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. And when you see this guy on the show, you know it's Sunday. And what's that mean? It means we're talking ball with Matt Hladek of Men's Journal. We love having Matt on the program. So, Matt, let's dig right in. I got a lot of things to talk to you about. The Raiders have a bunch of new weapons. And I specifically want to talk about offense. We know how good Patrick Graham has been. And since he got away from New York, he was very good before he got to New York. In New York, there was a lot of, no offense to you being a Giants fan, but there was a lot of restraint on him, and he had bosses. But he gets to the desert, has been brilliant with the defense for the Raiders. The problem has been offense. So I want to keep the focus on offense today. They picked Dante Thornton, 6'5", runs a flat 4.3. I mean, the guy just flat flies. Jack Bech only drops one pass last year in all of college football and was the best blocker. He's just the most physical wide receiver in the draft this year. They add Ashton Jeanty. Then they go get Geno Smith. I think he's a top 10, but I've seen people who I respect have him anywhere from 10 to 15 quarterback in this league. There are a lot of new weapons in this Raiders offense. And with the Chip Kelly, where when you go back and study everything he did, from Oregon to Ohio State last year, he runs virtually every offense known to man because he adjusts his offense to the talent he has. Is it fair to have the opinion of which I have is with all these new weapons and the way Chip uses them, the Raiders are a complete mystery to whoever's trying to scout them. And I think this is an excellent, excellent advantage that the Raiders have.
Right. Well, you know that they're going to get the ball to Ashton Genty and to Brock Bowers a lot. Like that's not a secret. Everyone knows that. But I mean, in the NFL, everyone knows you're looking to get the ball to your best playmakers. Um, to me, I think the wild cards are the receiving core. I think that everyone knows what Jacoby Myers can do, and Trey Tucker has shown in his first couple of seasons. But like you mentioned, Thornton and Jack Bech, some of the younger guys, they're going to go young in that receiving core. They're going to look to um, kind of get production from there. And they loaded up on that position in the offseason, which tells you that, they want to find guys there cheaper for now and productive that can make plays and can be a valued part of both the passing and running games. Obviously, they had a high price guy in Devontae Adams, who is still a really good player, but the situation didn't work out. So now they kind of pivot and they go with more of a youth movement. So I think that it'll be fascinating to see how those younger guys shake out. And I think that that's what will make a big difference in how the passing game looks this year. How they perform will have a big impact.
I mentioned just the new pieces, so let's go back. You
Mhm.
mentioned Jacoby and Brock. I mean, Jacoby, the most reliable receiver in the NFL last year, he did not drop one pass, not one. I mean, the most reliable receiver. Is Jacoby Myers the most underrated offensive player in the NFL?
Well, I don't know. That's a tough thing to say for sure, but he's definitely a guy that is, gets gets overlooked at times. I mean, obviously he came from he's never put up crazy numbers and he's always sort of been a number two wherever he's played, whether it's New England or Vegas. But I think what he was able to show last year with kind of spotty quarterback play, and after Devontae Adams got traded, where he was really the main guy in Las Vegas, is encouraging because they're going to need him to be that wide receiver one, at least when the season begins. And again, when you have Brock Bowers at tight end, that is really your main passing target. But still, you need that top receiver, that guy that's going to be able to, make plays or be, the focal point of your offense when you've got to have it.
Last year, he went for over 1,000 yards, which I agree is not
Mhm.
crazy, but it's super good.
Mhm.
The year before, he was on his way to that till Devontae, in my opinion, threw a temper tantrum. And so they started trying to force it to Devontae, which makes no sense to me. And so that's what I mean by underrated. The guy just goes to work, does his job. If they can't get him the ball, it's not his fault. But when he didn't drop one catchable ball it certainly proclude, precludes us to come to at least some conclusion of him being underrated. And if he had been on a better team, I
Mhm.
think he would be a much more notorious. Is that fair?
That's fair. I think if you look at, he's a guy that gets overlooked partially because hasn't played on many great teams in his career, and I think that he hit what he did last season with the Raiders was overshadowed by some of the storylines around the team, as
Right.
opposed to just how good his individual play was.
Well, I think there's some people in New England would argue that he hasn't played on some pretty good teams, but
Yeah.
I get your point. I get your point. All
Mhm.
right, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to go to the NFL in totality. I have said for many, many years,
Mhm.
since I think 2002 is when I first said it, may have been 2004, that the only thing that can kill the NFL's reign as the big dog in pro sports is the NFL. There's a huge lawsuit that a lot of people are not talking about because of NFL Sunday Ticket, the proliferation to all of the streaming channels. I'm curious, is the NFL just expanding its base, grabbing new revenue sources, or are they in danger here, Matt, of getting too close? And I want to tell you why I'm coming at this. Recently, I was speaking to an NFL player's mom and dad who happen to be good friends of mine. I've known them since their child was a prospect, a college prospect in high school. And their child is very successful, has a lot of money, and they're successful. So they're not living vicariously. But the dad said to me, he goes, I have to have like 4 or 5 different streaming services
Mhm.
to watch all the games. He goes, I'm not doing it. He goes, and I know it sucks. I love my son. He goes, but it's absolutely ridiculous. And as I'm listening to them, these are affluent people, not because of their son's success, but because of their own. But they're affluent people and they can afford it. So after I heard that, it clicked in my ear. So as I would start to talk to a couple of other people, and I sent a text out to some of people, both players, parents, and people I know who are just diehard NFL fans. I texted a very good friend of mine who he and his wife go to 10 different games a year, 10 different stadiums. They enjoy football. They're not really a fan of one team. And he goes, it doesn't affect us because we travel. He goes, but we only go to 10 games. And he goes, so there's going to be a lot of weeks. He goes, I don't want to buy 5 services. And as I'm starting to accumulate, and it's not scientific, I am sensing, maybe it's all me, that NFL fans are they feel like the NFL always has their hands in their pocket. Is this a legitimate concern?
It's a concern. I don't necessarily know if it's a threat to their supreme standing, like we've talked about, on top of the sports world, but I do think it is a little bit of an issue that they're facing. I saw a couple of articles that were published uh, this past week. Um, I want to say the Washington Post, and I can't remember where the other one was. I remember the author was June Lee. So June Lee, Joon Lee. He wrote up basically just how pricey it is for the average sports fan these days with streaming services and how much it costs to go to games, and sports is becoming too expensive for everybody. So it kind of does play into that. But I don't think it's going to be something that kind of knocks them off their perch, because if you look at it, one of the second most popular sport uh, remains baseball, and baseball is dealing with this same problem because they might have their games on even more streaming services. I know, every week your team is on Apple TV or Amazon or Roku or whatever. Um, but I do think it's something the NFL has to kind of look at and see if there at any point there does become diminishing returns, because you're getting people who maybe cut cable because they thought it'd be cheaper to stream or do different things. And now as they rack up and accumulate all these different services that you need to watch your team, and even if they are paying for cable, the services that you need on top of that to watch your team or to watch the league if you're somebody who really wants to watch as many games as possible, it's adding up, and it's adding up big time.
I want to talk to you about coaching. It used to be in the NFL that coaching was enormous. We remember the years of Shula, Jimmy Johnson, all the greats. And then it almost went away with a generation of young analytic coaches. And thanks to Sean McVay, let's give him credit where credit's due. But and even Kyle Shanahan to a degree. But there seems to be a swath, a huge switch back towards re-understanding the value of a head coach. Pete Carroll, if he is able to get the Raiders, not even in the playoffs, but where that final week they're in the hunt, are we going to continue to see the pendulum swing back in the NFL towards, man, you got to go get an experienced head coach and somebody that knows what they're doing?
Yeah, to me, I think the football has always been the sport where coaches have the biggest impact, and I think it's going to continue that way out of the major sports, the four major sports. And I think that when you look at everything a coach has to do, not just schematically X's and O's, but setting a tone, setting a program, getting the locker room to buy in with so many different guys, it's always going to be paramount to a team's success. But I do wonder, if you see Pete Carroll have success after being out of coaching, he was still involved in football, but not coaching for a year and being being an older head coach. If you're going to see teams not hesitate as much when they have to go back to a retread or somebody who has been around a while that may get discounted because of their age or because of they're on the older side of their career. Pete Carroll having success may make teams kind of reconsider. I say, hey, you know what? These guys were successful in the beginning for a reason. They have this experience because of all they can bring. Let's not just discount them for a hot up and coming coordinator or somebody who is on the rise there just because that was the thing to do or is the thing to do.
All right. I've got to read an email from a listener, and I've got one more NFL question. Then I have a very huge, important question for you to end the interview today. This comes to us from Patrick R. Patrick R. lives in Belmont, New York. He says, Dear Mr. Carpenter, I've loved your podcast for many, many years. I was thrilled when you went from college sports to pro sports because I am a huge Raider fan. My father actually knew Al Davis long before he moved to the West Coast when he was a New Yorker. They weren't friends, but knew each other. So in my family, we were always Raider fans. I love having Matt Hladek on the show. I liked him previously when you guys were talking college because he was a Rutgers guy, and I'm a Rutgers guy. I would love the two of you if you would take the time on a podcast before the season starts to hash out who are the top 5 coaches in NFL history. Now, that's from Belmont. So, let's hash this out. I think you have to put on that list. I think Parcells has to be there. I think Paul Brown has to be there. I think Vince Lombardi has to be there. First of all, do you agree that they have to be there?
Yeah, I have no objections so far. Those are all guys that I would have there.
Yeah. So then I think it really becomes a crapshoot. I mean, you could talk about a Don Coryell who didn't win as many championships, but he reinvented offense. You have to talk about an Al Davis. You have to talk about a John Madden, who, if you just look at statistics, winning percentage was. I mean, there are so many. Jimmy Johnson, I think, has to be on there, at least in major consideration, the way he changed the game, the thinking process of the game. Chuck Noll, Tom Landry.
Yeah.
Help me here, Matt. If we agree on the first 3, who are the next 2 on the Matt Hladek list?
To me, I think it comes down to I think you'd have to put Belichick on there.
Yep.
And I think it's so tough because then you're looking at, for the last spot, you have Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, Don Shula, and Bill Walsh to me for that last spot. And there really is no bad answer out of those guys. I mean, you look at all they accomplished. You can look at, obviously Chuck Noll spearheaded the greatest dynasty of the 70s and one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history, and brought the Steelers from a period of irrelevance to being the standard. Tom Landry, all he did with the Cowboys and the invention, and he doesn't necessarily, people forget. People think about all the wins he got, but they forget, the flex defense and the motions on offense and all the different things that he did. Bill Walsh obviously invented the West Coast offense, or if he didn't invent it, he took what he learned from Paul Brown and his own thoughts and perfected it. And Don Shula was the winningest coach in NFL history. I think still is the winningest coach in NFL history. So excuse me for a second. It's hard. And I think that you can even make a case to replace one or the other guys. Now, it's just so hard to take off, Vince Lombardi for all he did, and Paul Brown for what he did to modernize the NFL, all the winning he had, and Bill Parcells winning, multiple championships with the Giants, going to Super Bowl in New England, turning around the Jets, turning around the Cowboys. It's such a hard thing. I do think Bill Belichick has to have that fourth spot. And the fifth spot is really a matter of preference.
Yeah, I'm going to give it to Bill Walsh.
Yeah, I would probably lean Bill Walsh.
I agree. Don Shula is the winningest coach, 100%. And anyone that's heard this podcast know I have reverence for him. But Bill Walsh didn't. Magic Johnson, one time I asked him, we were in the bowels of the Breslin Center, and I said, what makes a great player great? And I'll never forget his answer. He said this to me, and it just blew my mind. He said, all great players are good players. And I thought, well, okay. And if really, when he said that at first, I'm like, that's nonsensical. Of course, we knew that. He goes, great ones are good players who make others around them better. And that blew my mind. I'd never thought of it like that. And he goes, you look at me, Michael, Larry Bird. He goes, we prided ourselves. We didn't want to go to a team that already had 4 stars or get our 4 best friends to come together. He goes, me, Larry, and Michael never said, hey, let's join a team together. He goes, talking about the modern NBA. He said, but we looked at, let's make our teammates better. And so having said that, this is where I'm coming at with Bill Walsh. Don Shula won a ton of games, a ton of different ways. A man who deserves top 10. But when you look at that top 5, Bill Walsh changed his era. But he's still changing the NFL today. When you look at Sean McVay, Shanahan, and all these other young coaches who go back, and there's a tree there that leads back to influences by Bill Walsh. To me, you don't hear about a lot of Shula changing the game today. You hear about his principles and that kind of stuff. But Bill Walsh is still changing the game today. Is that a fair argument of why he deserves 5?
No, I think that was actually, if I was leaning towards putting him there, and I think that's the biggest reason to put him there, not even just for the amount of winning he did with the 49ers, winning 3 Super Bowls there in the 80s and basically setting up the 4th that George Seifert won, but just the fact that he did, he did everything. He revamped the entire world of NFL offensive football. He changed what people knew offense in the NFL to be and what it could be, because it was all just to that point, control the game on the ground, passing, run to set up the pass, and the pass was big plays down the field. Passing wasn't the most efficient thing. at that point. Um, it was just, big strikes. You don't have to worry about completion percentage, but, we're going to hit big plays. We're going to control the game with running. Football is a game of brute strength and force and not necessarily thinking and patterns and all these other things. And he changed all of that. And his influence, I don't know if there's been a coach who's been more influential in the entire history of the league.
All right. Last question, and it's a football question. It's an NFL question, but it's also college football. Recently, we were with a very successful NFL executive, and we were talking about the NFL game. And I said to him, for many years, I felt like college football was better than NFL. I don't believe that anymore. I've not believed it for a while. And especially as the rules have begun to change, I don't even, now I don't even think it's even close. I think the NFL is a superior league. But this is what he said to me. In fact, I asked him, "Do you care if I write it down?" He said, "No," because I wanted to talk about it with you. This is what he said. Quote, "Until college football makes the obvious move of making players employees, they're never going to fix the game. If you do contracts where the player knows what it costs to buy himself out, the school knows what it costs to buy themselves out to let a kid go, where a kid has to maintain a certain grade point average, has to go to class as all part of his contract deal, they're not going to fix it. I agree that it's the NCAA, the conferences, and the school's fault that it got here. But the way to fix it is simple. It's not a salary cap. It's simply making them employees. When I talk to people in college football, they all want to do it, but the NCAA and the conferences don't because they don't want to pay workman's comp and injuries that are sustained for a long time. The point is simply this: college football is our semi pro league, it's our minor league. If they want to fix the game, it's not the game on the field, but they've got to go to contracts and just make it factual. The players are employees. Let them unionize. Matt, that's powerful.
It is. And
I
it's
would
something. Oh, you say, I'm sorry.
no, I would love your thoughts.
It's something that has been discussed and people have talked about, what are the next steps from here? We've gotten NIL, we've gotten, the transfer portal. What are the next steps? Are there any way to kind of regulate or change how things are done? And I think one of the biggest impediments to that is you have to get everybody thinking uniformly. And I don't think colleges and conferences are going to want to think that way because I've said this before on here. If you're from the Big Ten or the SEC, where you are the two most prominent conferences in the country, and you're from one of those programs in those leagues that has a strong NIL base and is able to, spend for players and do all those things, you're not going to want to be regulated or have a more even playing field. So that's where one of the challenges comes in. But I do think what you said about you're getting to a point where are the players going to be employees? Are they going to have to, collectively bargain, do all that stuff? And then at that point, it becomes minor league pro football, which, I mean, in some ways it is now basically, but it really becomes at that point, that's what it is, minor league pro football, because obviously the talent level won't be as good as the NFL, but you'll be doing it. It'll be run on a professional level. You won't have any of the last, vestiges of amateurism or anything like that left.
He told me, he was telling us, not just me, but about how it's changed. He goes, used to be if you went and saw a kid and he goes, you kind of know who you got your eyes on when they come out of high school, the obvious ones. And then freshman year, you look at guys who are emerging, sophomores, all that. He goes, now you may have an eye on a guy as a freshman at Rutgers. And then the next year he's at UCLA. And then the next year he's at Miami, Florida. And then the
Yep.
next year He's at Washington State. You literally,
Hmm.
they have people now doing more just watching where everybody's at. And he's just talked about it's ruining the college game when just making them employees instantly fix it. And by the way, this guy is a purist. I'll tell you who it is when we go off air. But I just thought that was a brilliant analysis. Matt, we love having you on each week. Tell everybody where they can read you at Men's Journal and then where to find you on social media, please.
Yeah, you can find my work at Men's Journal, and I'm writing about pretty much everything. I wrote uh, about NFL and other sports stuff, but I also write about food and some pop culture and some you know crime or human interest news and anything under the sun. And then if you look for me on Twitter at Matt Halatic 919, that's where I'm really almost totally talking ball, either NFL or NBA, baseball, whatever. Just come check me out over there
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. We'll see you
anytime.
again next week.